Caitlin Clark has added pressure to the March 10th date for the WNBA CB talks and added pressure to the WNBPA to get a deal done.
Inside the brutal, high-stakes world of billion-dollar labor negotiations, there is a huge difference between a simple deadline and a deadline that's designed to apply pressure. One is part of normal business. The other is a strategic weapon. And right now, what's unfolding around the WNBA's collective bargaining negotiations looks far closer to the second scenario. For months, most of the sports media has treated the situation like a routine disagreement about revenue percentages. The narrative pushed to the public was straightforward. The players' union was calmly holding its position while billionaire team owners would eventually have no choice but to give in. Much of that confidence came from the massive wave of attention surrounding Caitlin Clark, whose arrival has dramatically boosted interest in the league. The assumption was that the league could not afford to waste that momentum, meaning ownership groups would ultimately fold under the pressure. But conversations happening away from television cameras tell a very different story. Behind closed conference room doors, where executives and financial analysts actually examine the numbers, a much colder strategy appears to be unfolding. League ownership isn't simply negotiating anymore. Instead, many insiders believe they've begun applying a calculated plan meant to weaken the unity of the Players Association itself. This isn't friendly bargaining, it's strategic leverage. And the most interesting part is how the attention around Caitlin Clark may be playing into it. Rather than serving as protection for the players, that spotlight may actually be acting as a ticking clock, something ownership groups can use to speed up the pressure. So in this breakdown, we're going to look at what may really be happening here. The tactic known as the exploding offer, the scheduling realities threatening the upcoming season, and the type of corporate negotiating strategy that has ended labor standoffs in many industries before. And if you enjoy these deeper looks into the business side of sports, make sure you subscribe to Court Queens and drop a like on the video. It helps the channel grow and keeps these breakdowns coming. Because to understand why tension is building inside the WNBA Players Association right now, you need to examine the timeline the owners recently introduced into negotiations. Most headlines keep pointing toward the May 8th season opener as the moment both sides must resolve their issues. But according to league logistics, that date is misleading. The real deadline arrives much sooner. And when that reality was reportedly presented to union leadership, it immediately changed the entire tone of the situation.
WNBA delivered a stark ultimatum to the players' union. A deal must be reached by March 10th if the season is to start on time, according to AP.
March 10th. That's the date that has suddenly become the most important number in this entire negotiation. And according to league insiders, it wasn't chosen randomly to intimidate anyone. It represents the final practical point where organizing a professional basketball season can still realistically happen. To understand why that matters, look at the league's current situation. More than 80% of WNBA players are currently unrestricted free agents. That means most teams don't even have full rosters assembled yet. In many cases, they barely have any players signed at all. And the complications don't stop there. Two expansion teams, one in Toronto and another in Portland, have already invested enormous amounts of money to enter the league. These franchises are expected to begin competing soon, yet right now they technically don't have athletes under contract. Now look at the timeline. Between March 10th and the projected May 8th opener, there are fewer than 60 days available to complete a massive list of tasks. The league would need to conduct an expansion draft, open a major free agency period, coordinate players moving to new cities, run the college draft, begin training camps, and stage preseason games. None of that can happen without a finalized collective bargaining agreement. Teams can't sign contracts without knowing salary limits. Front offices can't structure deals without understanding league rules. Trades and roster protections can't be finalized until the new system is defined. Without an agreement, the entire process stalls. So the message reportedly coming from the league's leadership is very blunt. If an agreement isn't reached by March 10th, assembling teams in time for the season becomes nearly impossible. Delays would start immediately. Arena bookings could disappear as venues schedule concerts and other events instead. Broadcast plans would have to shift. And for players, that ultimately means lost income. But in high-level negotiations like this, setting a deadline is just the opening move. The next step is where things start getting intense. Because once a timeline exists, Ownership groups can introduce a tactic designed specifically to force decisions, something negotiators call an exploding offer. And once that strategy appears in a negotiation, everything changes. Before we get deeper into that, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Do the players actually have the leverage here, or are the owners playing a smarter game behind the scenes? Because according to former MLB executive David Sampson, the tactic that may be unfolding right now is one of the most effective pressure strategies in business.
But no revenue sharing movement. If you do not accept this deal by that day, every day following.
After we make an offer, every day that passes makes the deal worse. That statement captures the entire idea behind what negotiators call an exploding offer. In major labor disputes, it can become one of the most powerful tools ownership groups have. What David Sampson is describing is essentially controlled financial pressure. Instead of leaving a proposal on the table indefinitely, the offer begins to deteriorate over time. The longer the other side waits, the less valuable the agreement becomes. Picture the scenario being presented during negotiations. Owners place a contract proposal in front of the union. The terms include a specific salary cap, defined benefits, housing support, and revenue distribution. But attached to that proposal is a countdown. If the union doesn't accept the deal by March 10th, the terms start changing. March 11th arrives and the salary cap decreases. Another day passes and certain benefits disappear. Soon minimum salaries begin shrinking. With each passing day, the agreement becomes less favorable. This approach dramatically alters the psychology of negotiations. Instead of players focusing entirely on pushing back against ownership, attention shifts toward the clock. Time itself becomes the pressure point, and the strategy affects different players in different ways. The league's biggest stars, who earn millions through endorsement deals with companies like Nike or Gatorade, may be financially secure enough to wait. But many other players don't have that luxury. Role players, younger athletes, and those on minimum contracts often rely heavily on their league income. Missing paychecks quickly becomes a serious concern. That's where the true power of the exploding offer shows itself. It introduces tension inside the union. Some players will want to hold the line and negotiate for something better. Others will push leadership to accept the deal quickly before conditions get worse. Once that disagreement spreads, the unity that gives a labor group negotiating power begins to weaken. And historically, when that internal divide appears, ownership groups gain a major advantage. According to Sampson, that's exactly why this tactic exists. Without consequences for delaying, negotiations can drag on endlessly. But once penalties are introduced day after day, pressure builds rapidly. Which is why the current moment surrounding the WNBA negotiations has become so fascinating. If a strategy like this is truly being used, the next phase of talks could determine far more than just the contract. It could shape the direction of the entire league.
I love that strategy. I used it with players all the time. You don't want to agree right now? Your next offer is lower.
That's the price you pay when you refuse to move on my timeline. That line perfectly captures the cold reality behind high-level business negotiations. When billionaires talk about deadlines, they are rarely speaking emotionally. They're speaking strategically. And moments like this reveal how ownership groups often view their relationship with the athletes who make the league possible. Publicly, the WNBA is often presented as a partnership, a shared mission between league executives and players to grow the sport together. That's the image fans see in interviews and press conferences. Cooperation, unity, and collective progress. But inside corporate boardrooms, the conversation is far less sentimental. For many ownership groups, the league is ultimately a major investment, a business asset similar to real estate or a media company. The players, while essential to the product, are often viewed through the lens of contracts, expenses, and return on investment. When negotiations stall, executives begin thinking less about partnership and more about protecting the long-term financial structure of the league. And that's where the Caitlin Clark factor suddenly becomes incredibly important. Right now, the entire sports world is waiting to see what happens next in her career. Her presence has brought record attention, new viewers, sponsorship momentum, and media coverage that the league has never experienced before. Many people inside the players' union believe that spotlight gave them a powerful advantage. The logic seemed simple. Ownership would never risk disrupting a season built around the biggest star the league has ever had. In other words, they believe the Clark effect made the league untouchable. But ownership appears to be approaching it from the opposite angle. Instead of seeing the moment as protection for the players, they're treating it like a pressure point. By establishing the March 10th deadline, the message becomes very clear. If the season collapses, the responsibility will not fall solely on the owners. The question being posed is essentially this: who will the public blame? If the league says it cannot financially meet the union's demands, and the players refuse to compromise, then fans, sponsors, and media outlets may start pointing fingers at the union instead. Ownership groups are essentially shifting the spotlight directly onto the Players Association and asking them whether they're willing to risk the most anticipated season the league has ever had. It's a high-stakes public relations gamble layered on top of a financial one. At the same time, the exploding offer tactic adds another level of pressure behind the scenes. While public perception becomes a factor, the financial terms quietly tighten in the background. Together, those forces can create enormous strain inside a union. But there's one rule that everyone involved in high-level negotiations understands. If you issue an ultimatum, you must be willing to follow through. A deadline without consequences becomes meaningless. If March 11th arrives and nothing actually changes, the entire strategy collapses instantly. The union would know the threat was empty, and any leverage the owners hoped to create would disappear overnight. That's why the warning from experienced executives like David Sampson becomes so important here. Because according to people who have been in these battles before, the worst mistake an ownership group can make is threatening something they aren't prepared to enforce.
You have to follow through. Because if your child, your partner, your parent, the people with whom you work, the people against whom you negotiate, the agents, if they all believe that...
If the other side realizes your ultimatum isn't real, you've already lost. That warning summarizes the entire risk behind the strategy currently unfolding. Deadlines only work when everyone involved believes the consequences are unavoidable. The moment doubt creeps in, the leverage disappears. And that's why the March 10th date suddenly carries so much weight around the WNBA. From the perspective of ownership groups, this isn't just another negotiating checkpoint. It's the moment where they've essentially pushed every chip to the middle of the table. They've made it clear that they aren't agreeing to the revenue-sharing levels being demanded, and they aren't willing to absorb hundreds of millions in projected losses simply to keep talks going indefinitely. Just as importantly, they're insisting that negotiations cannot drag past the logistical window needed to build rosters and organize the season. In simple terms, the message is firm. The timeline is real. The situation almost resembles a high-stakes standoff. Ownership has drawn the boundary, placed the contract on the table, and now the decision shifts to the Players Association. Sign the deal, or watch the situation escalate. Veteran players pushing aggressively for roughly 27.5% of league revenue may soon discover how fragile their leverage actually is if the season begins slipping away. When games aren't played, salaries stop. Arena doors stay closed. The financial pressure shifts immediately onto the athletes themselves. That's the brutal reality of labor disputes in professional sports. What makes this situation even more dramatic is the economic boom surrounding Caitlin Clark. Her impact has driven viewership, ticket demand, and sponsorship interest to levels the league has never seen before. In many ways, it's the most powerful financial moment the WNBA has ever experienced. But ownership appears willing to pause that momentum entirely rather than agree to a system they believe threatens the league's long-term financial structure. From a corporate perspective, protecting the future value of the league may matter more than maximizing one explosive season. Which leads to the question that everyone watching this situation is asking. Is this a brilliant negotiation strategy designed to fracture union unity and force a deal? Or is it a dangerous gamble that could damage the most exciting era the league has ever had? And what happens when the financial pressure truly begins? Will veteran players stand firm behind union leadership? Or will frustration start spreading through locker rooms if paychecks disappear after March 10th? I want to hear your honest thoughts on this. Drop your full analysis in the comments below. No safe answers. Break it down the way you really see it. And if you enjoy content that digs into the real business side of sports instead of the usual headlines, make sure you subscribe to Court Queens, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because on this channel, we don't just repeat press conferences. We break down leverage, We follow the money, and we expose the strategies shaping the future of the game. I'll see you in the next one.